In de vorige lezing van Ella
You've just heard in the previous lecture from Ella that we live in a time with many opinions. There are many opinions, as there are people. Opinions are personal interpretations of what one sees and change often. People therefore often disagree, which is not a problem as long as people listen to one another respectfully. There are as many opinions as there are people, my mother used to say. A truth is something that you have examined yourself and experienced as accurate. But even your own truth is always limited and relative. It is always only a part of a bigger truth. We also mention that to go from a personal opinion to a truth, you firstly must be aware that it is always you who gives a reality to something. You always give your own interpretation to anything you observe, which is also known as objective idealism, which we also talked about. Objective idealism therefore means that there are individual relative truths. It has been said that a bigger truth or reality can exist, but that a bigger picture of this grand truth lies outside the ability of man to know. Because we, as limited people, simply cannot grasp this concept of boundlessness. An essential question that has been asked is, how do we get from these individual truths to an expansion of this limited truth? The answer was, by extending your limited reality, by broadening your mind. To be able to do that means that you must be willing to explore other opinions and to be open to the idea that those could contain truth. And you will have to explore and examine the things that you find. Ella just ended her lecture with an encouraging observation that in our thoughts lay the possibility to eventually reach compassion and wisdom. And in this lecture, we're going to expand on that observation with the question, what instruments do we have at our disposal to learn how to broaden our minds? To do this, I will firstly tell you something about the materialistic and spiritual image of man. After that, we will focus on the thinking faculty of man. These elements will be combined to show you that you can learn to rise above your individual truth. Many people today have adopted a materialistic image or view of man. I am a body, therefore I exist and am able to think. This image assumes that first there is a material body that develops a mind through which consciousness arises. This image also assumes a temporary existence. Theosophy, however, is based on a spiritual image of man, where consciousness is the working force behind all manifestation. So whereas people who think materialistically reason from the physical, externally visible body of man, Theosophy looks at man from his imperishable inner side, his spiritual side. This spirit is the same for any man and works through the soul. The soul is that part of the spirit that we have developed already, that learning part, and it forms the connection between the underlying consciousness and the physical body. The inner man, their thoughts, inspiration, and abilities pour forth from this spirit, through the soul, into the physical body, and express themselves in thought and action. Man is therefore a composite being with different parts.
I just told you that Theosophy is based on a spiritual vision of man, with consciousness as driving force behind manifestation. This holds true in Theosophy, not only for mankind but for everything. Everything is consciousness. It's a matter of being that is conscious and of something it is conscious of. In that way, there has to be something that is active, that manifests itself, that mirrors itself to something else. For example, its surroundings. Essentially, it's the ability to observe, but observations that go beyond your normal daily sensory perceptions. Plato defines life, or consciousness, as the ability to act, to take action, and to react to the activities of other beings. This power is not only linked to a physical body, as is thought in the materialistic opinion, but to everything that manifests itself in every possible way. You don't have consciousness, you are consciousness. In Theosophy, the real man, the one with the capital M, is an invisible being. What we see with our senses is only the manifestation of this inner man, because man, in principle, is a spiritual force. Although this human being is invisible to our senses, he does need a physical body. A body in which he can live, which he can operate and use to interact with others on this physical level. The level that we are able to perceive with our senses. The spirit of man works through the human soul. The soul is not the spirit itself, it's the vehicle of the spirit. This human soul, in its turn, works through the physical body. The higher does not become the lower, but works through the lower. It manifests itself, it expresses itself in the lower part. It's essential to state that the perceived reality is only a reflection, a projection, or an effect of something that we cannot observe with our own physical senses. To what extent a human being like you or me has formed this underlying invisible force in this life can be known also by us. It becomes apparent by your true love for your fellow man, by your highest aspirations and by your vision. But it can only be known if you have formed this partly in yourself. So actually you recognize it. Nelson Mandela, for example, is someone who later in life, more than the average person, shaped his higher aspirations to form a society where all men are equal. A lot of leaders, other leaders, such as for example Donald Trump, seem to take their personal emotions and ambitions as a starting point for their thoughts and acts. The specific form of consciousness for us as humans is the human thinking faculty. There are different levels of thinking. For example, the daily thoughts, like I'm hungry, or it's time to make dinner, or I have to rush if I want to catch my train. Or what shall I do today? Shall I sleep in or be on time for my appointment? But a judge, who has to rule in court, will think of all the laws which are applicable to a specific situation that is presented to him. And the scientific researcher will think of all kinds of mathematical and physical formulas in his work when he starts a big experiment. And the philanthropist will think of the good purposes he can spend his time and money on.
These levels of thinking are of a different quality. and they derive from different parts of man. The thought, I am hungry, is important to maintain the physical body, and therefore we call this the physical aspect of thinking. These thoughts help us to eat and to drink on time, but the thoughts disappear, of course, as soon as the hunger or thirst is lessened. This thinking is also short-lived, disappearing when the goal is reached. Likewise, thoughts of disgust or sympathy coming from the emotional aspect, for example, I am angry or I am in love, are normally short-term thoughts. For example, when you're angry with a colleague because he, at the end of the day, is not ready with his part of the assignment, this anger can also disappear like a snowflake in the sun when he, after working all night long, delivers his part in the morning. A third aspect of thinking is related to the desire to accomplish things. This is the vitality aspect of thinking. This aspect expresses itself by willingness to act, to do things, to solve situations with decisiveness. We actually distinguish 7 aspects of thinking in man, and the 4th aspect is, in the current phase of the development of man, by far the most dominant aspect. This is the desire aspect, also known as the desire force. Desire is in itself a neutral power, which draws its character from the motive behind it and the goal for which it is used. Because of this motive, this aspect is mentioned twice in the diagram. You see, this aspect can be targeted downward to the physical, temporary part of man, but it can also be targeted towards the higher, the spiritual part. I will return to this subject in a minute, but will firstly name all 7 aspects of thinking. We have now arrived at the higher thinking aspects. The 5th is the intellectual thinking aspect, which, for example, expresses itself in the shape of a mathematical formula. This aspect of thinking endures much longer than thinking of the physical or emotional aspects. It can also be used by different people in different applications. A mathematical thought or thesis does not depend on a personal opinion or state of mind. Whether you are angry, tired, or in love, 2 times 2 is 4. An hypothesis in mathematics is valid until another scientist proves that there are situations where the formula is not valid, or until a new formula takes its place with a broader scope. This can take centuries. In our age, with much attention for scientific research and higher education, more and more people are trained in this way of thinking. Now we arrive at the higher thinking aspects that are not developed at a large scale in the current mankind. The 6th aspect is namely about insight, the real understanding of a situation and the comprehension. This thinking lies at the basis of unselfishness and righteousness. It leads to gentleness and makes it possible for people to forgive. Finally, there is an aspect of the thinking faculty that lies outside the intellectual knowing power of man. This is our inspiration and the notion of unity. This aspect causes the experiences of a mystic and the inspiration of an artist.
In the diagram, a line is drawn through the aspect of desire. This is the aspect I said I would get back to. As I just made clear, the thinking aspects above the line are more generally applicable to multiple men in multiple situations. These aspects are more related to insight. People who are thinking this way are looking for the coherence of things, the interdependencies and the unity of the whole, the more universal. We call this therefore impersonal thinking. The thinking underneath the line has a much smaller scope. This way of thinking is much more self-centered and based on personal needs, feelings and experiences. We therefore call this personal thinking. Thinking below the line leads swiftly to an opinion. Thinking above the line is more abstract and helps us to come to a shared vision with much more people and subsequently gets to the truth. The human mind can only function at its best when all aspects are completely active and are used to the fullest by the human being. As we concluded in our first lecture, we do have something to learn and develop with each other in our society. The aspects of thinking that are used by a person together form one's own demarcated, comfortable bubble. In general, you see what you already know and are acquainted with because you recognize it. The current internet amplifies this by giving only information that you already have looked for. Theosophy, by the way, claims that this recognizing is not based on experiences in one lifetime, but on experiences gathered in multiple lifetimes. In your own bubble, you form your own opinions, your own restricted vision on life, your image of man and the meaning of life. You give reality to the world that surrounds you. The essential question is, how can you expand that bubble? How can you rise above this restricted vision and come to a bigger truth? What possibilities are at your disposal for this? To cut straight to the chase, your character forms the limitation of the range of your thinking. Your character, your scope of consciousness, defines your thoughts and the images you pick up. This character is built through habitual patterns that are formed in our thoughts. Habitual patterns we share with others, like family, friends or colleagues. We therefore are limited because of our character and patterns in our thinking, and this is a normal part of our human development. Luckily, we can deal with this restriction, which we all have. We can grow. Everything we need is within ourselves, in the underlying spirit, that through our soul has formed the physical body and expresses our character. This growth does not come of itself. It takes an effort. Anyone who has tried to change a habit knows what I'm talking about. The expansion of your scope of consciousness, of your character, starts by thinking differently. Changing your thoughts leads to different actions, which leads to different habits, which in the end leads to a change of character. The sequence is therefore thought, action, habit, character.
Thinking differently, we can practice through unbiased observation. This means trying to see the things that we not already see out of recognition. Other people can help you with this by sharing their thoughts, for which you can open up. You can ponder over these new thoughts and try not to draw any conclusions too soon. When you then think that you understand, you can talk to that person again, tell them how you understood their thoughts, and ask them if that is indeed what they meant to say. You can practice to not follow the thinking patterns of your family, your colleagues, or your friends, but to think as independently as much as possible. For example, you share these thinking patterns with people that you grew up with. For example, the Netherlands, by much Dutch people, is called a country based on Christian tradition. When you ask these people what they mean by this tradition, few of them can really describe this tradition. And even if they can, for example by naming the Christian holidays, then they celebrate them without knowing the background of these days. This is actually a contradictory fact. The personality below the line draws a conclusion. We share a Christian cultural background. But in the meantime, above the line you think, do we actually? What is the value of this statement? At the core of unbiased thinking lies wonder. True wonder opens itself to the unknown, is neutral, dares to listen without prejudice, and is able to look at other thoughts with an open mind. Wonder, as we use it here, therefore arises from the impersonal thinking aspects. In our daily used language, this term is also used for surprise, amazement, or even curiosity. These terms are better words for the lower thinking aspects, such as the emotional thinking aspect or the personal desire aspect, because these terms are much more related to thoughts such as, what a nice surprise! This surprise is not what I expected, or wow! I really would like to know what is going on between those two. Or, seriously, was he involved in that? Wonder, as meant here, concerns desire for truth, actually wanting to grasp the truth, whatever the truth is. It is related to your inner silence, is unbiased, contemplative, and helps you to open up to other thoughts than you are used to thinking. It helps you, step by step, to change your character.
To actually rise above illusion and evolve from opinion to a more universal truth, a connection must be made with the inner wisdom. That is the wisdom that acknowledges the coherence of things and connection to the whole, that experiences the connections with all other beings. Herein still lie many latent powers in each and every one of us that are yet to be developed. In this lecture, I focused on the question, which instruments do we have at our disposal to learn to broaden our thinking? I started by telling you about the materialistic and spiritualistic image of man and the composite constitution of man. In addition to that, I told you about the different aspects of thinking. These elements were combined to show you how you are able to rise above your individual truth and how you can broaden your mind from personal thinking to impersonal thinking. I also stated the importance of wonder in this process. If you would act upon this, what you would actually do is step by step thinking differently. By thinking differently, you are able to change your actions, habits, and finally your character. You change your way of thinking as a person, colored by personal emotions and experiences, to a way of thinking that leads to a broader, impersonal truth. Key is an ever higher quality of thinking that rises above your personal opinion and experiences. To find out where you stand at this moment, what your vision is, and whether or not you already recognize and use your own partly latent thinking aspects, you can go to the workshop with the title Break Through Your Bubble.